My mother stole my inheritance from my father. And during the trial, she bribed my lawyer with that same money. My name is Eric Malone. I'm 29 now, a corporate analyst at a big firm you've definitely heard of, but that part isn't really important. What is important is that I wasn't supposed to be here. Not according to my family, at least. I grew up in a trailer on the outskirts of Tulsa. We weren't just poor. We were the kind of poor where dinner was sometimes canned beans, and the heating bill was a monthly gamble. My mom had this way of making me feel like I was extra weight. Not in a screaming, slapping kind of way, though there were a couple of those moments too, but in the everyday way. The way she'd always make a second plate for my older brother Chad first, always praised him louder, smiled longer. And Chad, well, he soaked up every ounce of it. Mom's golden boy. The one who could never do wrong even when he was skipping school, stealing from gas stations, or getting girls pregnant by the time he was 17. Me? I was the quiet one, the weird kid who liked books more than football, who figured out how to fix the neighbor's broken microwave at 11 and who saved his allowance, what little I got, for secondhand school supplies. I remember once bringing home an A+ on a math test, held it up like it was a ticket to freedom. My mom barely glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Eric. Can you take the trash out now?" Chad failed that same test and still got a smile and he tries his best. I learned pretty quickly that approval wasn't something I was going to get for free, or maybe not at all. By high school, Chad was already in and out of juvie, and I was the one working 2 part-time jobs after school and still getting good grades. No one cared. Not really. College? I didn't think I'd ever make it there. We had no money. FAFSA barely scratched the surface. I applied to a dozen schools and got into 3, but I couldn't afford any of them. So I took a gap year, worked at a car wash during the day, stocked shelves at night, and slept in 4-hour stretches. During breaks, I'd read finance blogs on my cracked phone, watched YouTube lectures, and started teaching myself about stocks and personal budgeting. Eventually, I made it to community college. Not glamorous, but I made it work. Transferred to a state university after 2 years, got scholarships by the skin of my teeth, and kept grinding. I ate tuna sandwiches for months at a time, bought 1 pair of shoes a year. But I graduated, top of my class, corporate finance degree, and then I landed the internship that changed everything. It was at a firm in Chicago. I worked there like my life depended on it, because it kind of did. First one in, last one out. I didn't even have a real place to live at the time. Just crashed on an old buddy's couch in exchange for doing all the cooking and laundry. But that internship turned into a job offer, and the job offer turned into 6 years of climbing. Now I'm a corporate analyst at one of the top financial firms in the city. It's crazy to think about. 6 years ago, I couldn't afford a haircut. Now I own a 3-bedroom townhouse in Evanston, bought in cash. I started investing the moment I had a real paycheck. Crypto, stocks, REITs, some industrial real estate in Texas. I've taken risks, sure, but they paid off. One of my first wins was putting $800 into Ethereum back in early 2020. Sold it 2 years later and used the gains to help with my down payment. That's just one example. I read constantly, learned what others were doing wrong, and tried not to repeat those mistakes. I lived cheap, never showed off, and kept building. But here's the thing. My family never once congratulated me. Not when I graduated. Not when I bought the house. Not even when I tried to help them. I offered to pay off some of Mom's credit card debt when I noticed the collectors starting to call. She said she didn't want dirty money from Wall Street. Chad told me I was a sellout. "Forgot where you came from," he said, even though he's still mooching off our mother at 35 and sells stolen car parts under the table. I tried. I really did. I invited them over when I bought the place. Cooked dinner. Made it nice. They showed up late. Chad brought a 6-pack, got drunk by 8 p.m., and knocked over a lamp I'd just bought. My mom said the place was too sterile and asked why I didn't buy something more homey. That was the last time they came over. The worst part? I still care. I still catch myself checking their Facebook pages sometimes. Mom still posts all about Chad. Every new job, he never keeps them. Every new business venture. Every time he does something remotely functional like getting his car registered. Meanwhile, I get nothing. I once sent her photos from a conference I spoke at in New York. I even made a joke about how far I'd come. No reply. Not even a scene mark. It's like I'm invisible. So now I've stopped trying. I've built a life that makes me proud. I have friends who respect me. I have colleagues who value my input. I've mentored 2 interns this year and watched them grow. I've started looking into buying my first rental property. I've taken solo vacations just to prove I could. But there's still that ache. That little part of me that wonders why I was never enough for them. Maybe I never will be. Maybe I was never supposed to be. But I made it anyway. I got the call on a Thursday morning, right as I was finishing my second espresso and reviewing a quarterly report. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year, not since the last time she'd called to tell me Chad needed money for a business opportunity. which turned out to be flipping used ATVs. Her voice was flat and cold. Your father died last night. Heart attack. No details. No emotion. Just that. I asked when the funeral was, and she told me Saturday. Then she hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything, honestly. My father had never been warm. He was the kind of man who thought silence was better than affection, and disapproval was safer than love. But still, he was my dad, and hearing that he was gone hit me in a strange, disconnected way. The flight back to Oklahoma was quiet. I didn't even pack a suit. Just grabbed a black button-down and dress shoes and left the rest behind. When I arrived, the house hadn't changed. Same vinyl siding, same leaning porch swing, same smell of old carpet and expired candles. Chad greeted me with a slap on the back like we were frat brothers. Surprised you showed, he said. I didn't answer. Mom barely looked up from the casserole dish she was covering with foil. We've already taken care of most things, she said, waving one hand like she was brushing away a mosquito. You don't have to worry. That was the first red flag. At the service, everyone kept talking about what a strong, quiet man my father had been. Salt of the earth, good with numbers, dependable. I stood there with my hands clasped and nodded like I agreed. No one mentioned the offshore accounts or the cash businesses he ran under the table. No one mentioned that I was the one who showed him how to move funds discreetly to Belize through layered transfers and shell companies. All legal enough to skate just under the radar, but shady enough to raise eyebrows if someone decided to look closely. I was 25 when I helped him set that up. He'd said, "You're smart with this finance stuff. Let's make sure Uncle Sam doesn't get more than he deserves." I didn't know what to say, so I just did it. After the funeral, we went back to the house. I stayed in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be my dad's office, even though all he did in there was drink and shuffle papers. The next morning, I asked my mom when the estate lawyer was coming. She blinked like she didn't understand the question. We already met with him, she said. There's not much to divide. Your father didn't have a will, and we took care of everything while he was still alive. That was the second red flag. I asked her what she meant. She got defensive, said I wasn't around, so I didn't need to worry about the details. I pushed, and finally, she admitted that she'd gotten power of attorney 2 years ago, right after Dad had a minor stroke. He asked me to, she said, shrugging. It made things easier. I asked her if he was of sound mind when he signed it. She said of course, but something in her voice, too fast, too casual, made my stomach twist. I spent the next day digging. I logged into the banking app Dad used before switching to cash. Password still worked. What I found was a ghost town. Accounts drained, balances sitting at zero. The investment portfolio I helped him build, liquidated 6 months ago, transferred to a joint account with her name on it. I couldn't believe it. Years of growth, smart investing, careful moves, all gone. And worse, none of it had passed through probate. She'd taken it before he died. Chad, naturally, was all smiles. Driving a new Ford Raptor he definitely didn't buy with money he earned. Wearing a watch I recognized from my dad's drawer, though it had mysteriously disappeared from the house after the service. I cornered him on the back porch, asked him point blank what the hell was going on. He gave me that smug grin I used to fantasize about punching. Dad wanted me to have it, he said. Said I'd do more with it than you ever would. I laughed, out loud, because it was absurd. My father barely trusted Chad to microwave popcorn without burning the house down. But Mom, she believed in Chad. Always had. If he wanted something, she found a way to justify it. If I wanted something, she found a way to make me feel guilty about it. So I knew, in my gut, that she'd helped him siphon those assets. And I suspected she used that power of attorney to make it look legitimate. Later, I confronted her. Sat down at the kitchen table with every document I could scrape together. Wire transfers, account statements, timestamps. You stole this, I said. Dad was alive, and you moved hundreds of thousands into your own accounts. That's fraud. She didn't flinch. It's not fraud if he authorized it, she said calmly. And besides, most of it was under the table. Do you really want to go to court and explain where it came from? And that was the moment I realized she had me. Because she was right. If I pushed this, it would all come out. The offshore transfers. The tax avoidance. My name in the email chains. The little digital fingerprints I left on spreadsheets and encrypted folders. I'd made sure everything looked clean enough on the surface, but once you opened the box, the smell was unmistakable. If I tried to fight for my share, I'd be implicating myself in everything. So I didn't fight. I packed up my things that night. Took one last look at the place I used to call home. Chad didn't even come downstairs. My mother gave me a pat on the arm as I left, like I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Back in Chicago, I poured myself a drink, sat at my desk, and opened a blank document. Started writing down every name, every bank, every dollar amount I could remember. Not because I planned to do anything with it. Not yet, anyway. but because I needed to remember what they'd taken and how easily they'd done it. Because the thing is, I might be done with them, but I don't think they're done with me. It happened the morning after I confronted her. I was in the kitchen, still trying to wrap my head around everything, staring at the cheap floral wallpaper that had peeled at the corners for as long as I could remember. My suitcase sat by the door. I hadn't unpacked much. Didn't plan to stay long. I'd barely slept. My mind kept looping through the bank statements and asset transfers, the offshore accounts I once set up with surgical precision, now gutted and washed into her and Chad's hands. I thought we might still be able to talk, maybe find some middle ground, at least preserve a thread of civility. I was wrong. She walked in like nothing was wrong, poured herself half a cup of black coffee, didn't offer me any, and said, without turning to face me, "You need to leave today." I looked up from the table. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She turned slowly and met my eyes. "You're no longer part of this family, Eric." It wasn't said in anger. There was no fire in her voice. Just this strange, rehearsed coldness. Like it was a decision she had made weeks ago and was now simply acting out. I sat back in my chair, completely still. "Because I asked questions?" I said. "Because I don't want to pretend that Dad didn't get robbed in the final months of his life." She shook her head, like she was disappointed in me for not understanding the script. "Because you didn't help when you were needed," she said. "You abandoned your father. You left us to handle things." She was rewriting history right there in front of me. "You mean when you got power of attorney and drained his accounts behind his back?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time. That's when she lost the mask. "You think you're better than us because you've got a condo in Chicago and a big job and your little investments. But you were never here. Chad was here. I was here. We took care of things. You didn't." I stared at her. "You took care of things by stealing everything he built." She moved closer, and for a second I thought she might slap me. Instead, she leaned in, her voice low and sharp. "You're a liability now. I've seen your face, Eric. You're thinking of exposing us. You forget your fingerprints are on that money too. You want to blow it up? Go ahead. Just remember what you'll be standing in when the smoke clears." I opened my mouth, then shut it again. There was nothing left to say. She'd drawn the line. Chad appeared in the hallway behind her, arms crossed, smug as ever. "You heard her," he said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." She walked out, and I sat there for a full minute, heart pounding, unsure if I felt more betrayed or stupid. Then I stood up, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. I was halfway down the front steps when I heard her voice again, just above a whisper. "Take that with you," she said, and pointed to the small silver flash drive on the side table by the door. I hadn't noticed it before. I picked it up. "What is it?" "Call it a parting gift," she said. "You always liked your records." I didn't open it until I got back to Chicago, but I knew what it was. I had taught my father to keep backups. Encrypted archives. Silent trails for every wire transfer, every shell company, every transaction we buried under layers of anonymity. And now, whether out of guilt or recklessness or some twisted maternal instinct, she'd given me one final piece of power. She banned me from my father's house, told me I was no longer her son. But she forgot something. When you erase someone from your family, you don't get to control what they do next. It started slowly, in the way a sinkhole starts, a few cracks you don't notice until the ground disappears beneath you. The day after I got back to Chicago, I opened my phone and saw that 3 of my old high school friends had unfollowed me on Instagram. At first, I thought nothing of it. People grow apart. But then I noticed a post on Facebook from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a guy I played JV baseball with, talking vaguely about snakes in the grass who try to rob grieving families. The comments underneath made it clear who he was talking about. Chad had been running his mouth. Apparently, while I was flying back, my brother had been busy. He'd painted this narrative of me as the greedy son who swooped in after our father's death, tried to challenge the inheritance, and tear apart what little our poor mother had left. "He doesn't even call," Chad had written in one of his now-deleted posts. "But the moment there's money on the table, here he comes with lawyers and threats." Never mind that I hadn't spoken to a single attorney. Never mind that I hadn't touched a cent. The story was more powerful than the truth. Mutual friends started texting me awkward things like, "Hey man, is everything okay with your family?" Or, "Your mom seems pretty upset online. Maybe just give her space." I didn't know what they were seeing until I logged into Facebook and found out my own mother had shared a post claiming she was being harassed for documents during her time of mourning. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. People filled in the blanks. The worst came from Chad's girlfriend, who made a dramatic Instagram reel talking about how certain people think they're entitled to money just because they wear suits and live in cities and think they're better than real families who stayed behind. Within days, I lost over 100 followers. I was removed from a private finance group I'd been contributing to for years. Two of my former colleagues texted me saying they didn't want to be involved in whatever family stuff you've got going on. The air started to feel thinner. But what really knocked the wind out of me came from Chase Bank. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a call when an email popped up. Account alert. Unusual activity detected. I clicked through, expecting some minor fraud flag. Instead, I found that my main checking account had been restricted. I called immediately. After 20 minutes of security questions and hold music, a customer service rep with a strained voice told me that a complaint had been filed. A formal notice of financial fraud, family-related, was under review. I asked who filed it. She wouldn't say, just that it was related to recent estate concerns, and that because I had once been attached to joint investment accounts linked to an open probate investigation, the bank had placed a hold out of an abundance of caution. I asked how long the freeze would last. She said anywhere from 10 days to 3 weeks. I asked if she realized that this account handled my rent, my bills, my everything. She apologized, said there was nothing she could do. I sat in my apartment, staring at the message on my screen, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely helpless. Not anxious, not frustrated. Helpless. The kind of helpless that makes you check the fridge and do the math on how many meals you can stretch out of what's left. The kind that makes you cancel dinner plans because you can't cover a $40 tab, not until your backup funds transfer, which takes 2 business days. I had money, just not access to it. My brokerage account was fine, but I couldn't liquidate anything fast without triggering flags. The offshore holdings? Useless now. Untouchable unless I wanted to light a signal flare for every regulatory agency in the country. Chad and my mother had not only stolen what they could, now they were using the smoke to suffocate me. I kept checking my notifications. Every time I thought things had settled, a new post or message appeared. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years posted a photo of my dad with the caption, "Some people only remember their father when he's gone, and even then, it's for the wrong reasons." A former mentor unfollowed me on LinkedIn. Someone on Twitter called me a parasite in a suit. It wasn't just social anymore. It was personal, reputational, financial. They were squeezing me, slowly, with smiles on their faces. And I couldn't even buy groceries without feeling the pressure. The moment I saw the second overdraft warning from my credit card and realized my rent payment was going to bounce, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I swallowed what was left of my pride and reached out to a contact from my old firm, Bryce Teller, senior counsel in the compliance and risk division. He wasn't just some lawyer I shook hands with once at a Christmas party. We'd worked on the same due diligence team during a merger in 2022. He was sharp, discreet, and most importantly, not the kind of guy to flinch when a story started to smell like smoke. We met at a cafe near the Loop, the kind where no one asked questions if you sat in the corner for 3 hours with one espresso. I laid it all out. The power of attorney, the pre-death asset transfers, the frozen accounts, the smear campaign. I told him about the flash drive, the encrypted folder my father had never mentioned, full of contracts and email chains that made it clear the money hadn't just been moved. It had been laundered through a mess of side LLCs and investment shells, most of which were now sitting under Chad's name. Bryce didn't blink. He asked pointed questions, the kind that let me know he wasn't thinking emotionally. He was looking for leverage. Then I brought up the offshore money. He put down his coffee and looked me dead in the eye. "You do realize if this hits open court, an opposing counsel gets discovery access to your involvement in offshore funds. You're not just looking at losing this case. You're potentially looking at a federal audit, and if that snowballs, criminal exposure. Not just for you. Anyone who touched those accounts." I told him I knew, but I also told him I had an angle. A night's move. Buried in one of the folders my father had left behind, one I hadn't fully reviewed until the night before, was a trail of communications between him and a small advisory firm in Panama. The firm, it turned out, had been trying to pressure my father into moving more funds offshore just before his death. They claimed they could shield all assets from American taxation indefinitely, and included a list of aggressive tactics that even I hadn't been stupid enough to implement. One email, in particular, caught my eye. It was from the firm's managing partner to my father, and it mentioned, in writing, that should your family resist or challenge these transfers posthumously, your original directives will protect your estate. Only problem? My father never replied to that email. And more importantly, he never signed any of the attached documents. The transfer never happened. Instead, a week later, the funds were moved, but not through that firm. They were liquidated into domestic accounts under Chad's name, routed through a dead LLC my mother had revived 6 months earlier. That gave us our opening. Bryce filed the paperwork for a civil suit against both Chad and my mother, naming them in a claim of unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent transfer of assets prior to death, without consent of the principal. It was narrow, targeted, and it avoided triggering mandatory disclosures of offshore holdings, at least for now. The brilliance was in how Bryce framed the initial filing. He focused not on the source of the money but the process by which it had been taken. We didn't go after the entire estate. We went after the provable assets that had been domestic at the time of transfer, liquid cash accounts, brokerage funds, and most importantly, real estate. The move forced their hand. Because as much as they wanted to paint me as the black sheep, they hadn't been careful. The property transfers had been sloppy. The POA documents had inconsistencies. My mother's signature on the deed authorization didn't match the notary log from the same day. Chad had received large wire transfers from what was labeled a joint business account that had never actually filed tax returns. Bryce warned me not to celebrate. They'll come hard, he said, especially once discovery starts. And if they dig deep enough, they'll smell the offshore trail. You sure you want to keep this going? I told him yes, because I wasn't going to let them bury what they stole under a fake story of widowhood and loyalty. We filed in Cook County. The judge accepted the motion to preserve assets, which meant Chad couldn't sell, liquidate, or otherwise transfer anything named in the suit. My mother's lawyers filed for dismissal the next day. We were officially at war, and I had just played my first move. I should have known something was off the moment we stepped into the courtroom. Bryce wasn't his usual self. He was late, by 7 minutes, which for a guy who prided himself on being early to everything, was practically an hour. He didn't look at me when he walked in. No briefcase, just a thin folder tucked under his arm and a blank expression that didn't match the sharp, focused man I'd met with only days before. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. My hands were cold, but my jaw was tight. I'd prepped for this. I knew we had a solid preliminary argument. Our motion for asset preservation had already been accepted, and this first hearing was supposed to be procedural. Routine. Just the opening move in a long game. I wasn't expecting fireworks. I was expecting to breathe a little easier afterward. The judge, a no-nonsense type with sharp glasses and sharper questions, gave us the floor. Bryce stood slowly. I glanced at him, expecting to hear the line we'd rehearsed. Our position, our request to proceed with early discovery, our readiness to substantiate the timeline of transfers. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Your Honor, I need to formally withdraw from representation in this matter." I blinked. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, counselor? I cannot, in good conscience, continue to represent Mr. Malone," Bryce said, his voice steady but flat, "due to a conflict of interest and personal ethical concerns." I turned to him, stunned. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't look at me. The judge, clearly irritated, asked if this was related to information obtained during attorney-client privilege. Bryce said no. He simply stated that, given the sensitive nature of the financial background involved and recent developments, he could no longer stand behind the case. I stood up, heart pounding, and asked for a recess. The judge agreed, gave us 15 minutes, and I followed Bryce out into the hallway, grabbing his elbow. "What the hell is going on? You were all in 2 days ago." He finally turned to face me, and that's when I saw it. The guilt in his eyes, the way he couldn't hold my gaze for more than a second. "Eric," he said, lowering his voice, "I'm sorry. I didn't plan this. Things changed." "What changed?" I hissed. "Did they threaten you?" He looked away. "They made an offer." It hit me like a punch in the throat. "My mother paid you." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. "Are you serious? After everything I told you? After the nights we spent building this case?" Bryce looked like he wanted to disappear. "I didn't take a bribe. I accepted a settlement. A retainer for future consultation. It's technically not connected to this case anymore." "Bullshit," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You sold me out." He didn't argue. Just said, "You can find someone else. There are other attorneys." But I walked away before he could finish. Back in the courtroom, the judge granted his withdrawal. I was given 30 days to find new counsel. No one from my mother's side looked surprised. Chad even smiled at me as he walked past, like it was all just a game and he was 5 moves ahead. I left the courthouse alone, sick to my stomach and boiling with rage. One of the few people I thought I could trust had flipped, not because he believed in my mother's version of events, not because of some real moral crisis, because the money was better on her side. Another betrayal. Another lesson. One I wouldn't forget. I realized there was no way I was going to win this in court, not with my lawyer bought out, my name dragged through social media, and my finances temporarily crippled. So I pivoted. I stopped thinking like a son and started thinking like a strategist. If they wanted to play dirty, I would play silent, but effective. I still had the flash drive. The same one my mother handed me like it meant nothing, not realizing what it actually contained. Months of encrypted email chains, wire confirmations, scans of forged signatures, bank routing instructions, even handwritten notes between Chad and the so-called family accountant discussing how to time asset transfers before my father's death was public. My dad had kept everything, and I kept his backup. I knew I couldn't use it directly in court without exposing myself to potential scrutiny over the offshore activity, but that didn't mean I had to sit on it. There are other courts that matter more than the legal system, the court of public opinion and the federal agencies that don't ignore anonymous tips. So I made two moves. The first was reaching out to someone I had met years ago during a compliance training seminar, a journalist named Marla Kent. She was now with an independent investigative platform that focused on financial crime and white-collar corruption. I told her I had a story she wouldn't believe and a data trail to back it up. She was skeptical at first. Everyone says they have a bombshell. But I sent her a sanitized portion of the emails and some of the real estate transfer documents with redacted names. Within an hour, she called me back and asked if we could meet that same day. We met in a neutral co-working space near the lake. I handed her a new flash drive, identical to mine, but scrubbed and organized for review. She opened it, started scrolling, and by the time she got to the folder marked LLC transfers, pre-death, she let out a long breath and said, "Jesus Christ." I didn't tell her who I was. I kept it clean. Just said I was a whistleblower close to the situation. I didn't want to be the story. I just wanted the truth out there. My second move was quieter, but more public. I launched a website. Simple, black and white, no branding, just the name Estate Truth and a short manifesto. I published the full story in chapters. Every event, every document. I blurred names just enough to create deniability, but left enough breadcrumbs for any half-curious reader to connect the dots. I posted wire screenshots, signatures, real estate filings, and timelines. I timed the launch to coincide with the day Chad and my mother were hosting some family fundraising dinner for one of his new entrepreneurial ventures. I submitted the link to a dozen finance and legal forums under anonymous usernames. By the end of the week, it all detonated. Marla's article dropped first. The headline was brutal. Beneath the mourning, financial exploitation hidden in a family tragedy. It laid out everything. How assets were drained before death, how power of attorney was misused, how multiple shell companies funneled untaxed income into vehicles that vanished right before probate. She didn't name names, but anyone from our hometown would know exactly who she was talking about. Then the other shoe dropped. The IRS got involved. It started as a routine review, but I knew what it meant. Someone had flagged the offshore whispers. The flash drive contained multiple references to Belize, to Panama, to certain account numbers that matched known financial havens. The moment they saw the irregularities in the domestic transfers, it was only a matter of time before they pulled the rest of the thread. Chad's social media went dark first. The videos disappeared. The fake entrepreneur image collapsed. My mother deleted her Facebook profile altogether. Mutual friends started reaching out, not to apologize, but to distance themselves. "Hey man, didn't realize how deep that rabbit hole went," one of them texted. "Hope you're okay." For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. I wasn't winning in court. But the truth had legs now, and it was running fast. I found out she'd been arrested while standing in line at the bank. The woman behind the counter had just told me, for the third time, that they were still reviewing the fraud hold on my account, when my phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. I almost didn't look, thought it was more noise from the website I'd launched, but when I saw the headline, I stopped breathing. Local woman charged in financial crimes linked to charity laundering scheme. I clicked it. There was her picture. My mother. The same woman who once made me sit in the back row at church because my shirt had a missing button, now in a gray jumpsuit, escorted in cuffs. The photo was from early that morning. They'd raided the community center where she volunteered and served the warrant at the house shortly after. The article was clinical. She had been charged with wire fraud, tax evasion, and laundering funds through a regional nonprofit she ran under the name Hands of Grace Foundation. I knew the name well. I remembered when she launched it, claimed it was for widows and struggling mothers. Apparently, it was for hiding the leftover cash from my father's accounts. According to the article, the nonprofit had accepted large, anonymous donations over the past 4 years, routed from a holding firm based in the British Virgin Islands. She'd used the foundation to make purchases in the U.S., laundering the money as community expenses, real estate for outreach offices, which turned out to be rental properties, equipment for youth centers that didn't exist. All of it passed through her name, justified with made-up paperwork. She even listed Chad as a contractor for transport logistics. That part made my stomach turn. What made it worse, what made me feel like I was standing on another planet, was that she hadn't just gotten caught on technicalities. The flash drive had only scratched the surface. The journalist I'd given it to had, without me knowing, submitted a sealed tip to federal authorities. They had opened a quiet investigation months before I ever stepped into that courtroom, and when the story exploded online, They moved fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than I was ready for. I left the bank with nothing resolved. I didn't care. I walked straight to the lake and just sat there, watching the water, my phone buzzing nonstop with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were shocked. Some were apologetic. A few just wanted to know if I'd comment. I didn't answer any of them. The second shock came later that night. I was sitting in my apartment, trying to process it all, when I got a call from Chad's wife, Emily. We'd never been close, barely more than polite nods at holiday dinners. But when I answered, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "He's gone," she said. "Chad's gone. He took everything and left." She didn't mean emotionally. She meant physically. He'd drained their joint account that morning, right before the news broke. Canceled his phone. Disconnected from every social media account. Left a note that said nothing except, "I had no choice. Don't come looking for me." She didn't even know where he'd gone. Just that a friend of his, someone from college, had helped him get a fake identity years ago in case things went south. That was her phrase, not mine. Now she was sitting in the kitchen with 2 kids and no savings, their mortgage unpaid for 3 months, and a letter from the IRS on the table. I didn't know what to say. I hated Chad, hated what he did. But hearing the panic in her voice, real, raw, human, I couldn't just hang up. I told her to get a lawyer, to document everything, to protect herself. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time. My mother in custody, my brother on the run, his family left behind, broken, all of it unraveling faster than I could keep up with. This wasn't revenge. It didn't feel like justice, either. It just felt like truth, finally surfacing. The summons came by certified mail, a thick envelope with the Department of Justice seal, and my full name typed across the front in bold. I knew what it was the second I saw it. The media fallout had triggered investigations at every level, federal, state, tax, corporate. It was only a matter of time before they brought me into the room. The hearing wasn't in some dim back office or rundown courthouse. It was in a clean, cold federal building with polished floors and the quiet kind of security that makes your skin crawl. I wore a gray blazer that no longer fit like it used to and walked past rows of armed guards and blank stares. A young prosecutor named Donnelly met me in the hall and led me to a private conference room. 2 agents were already seated. One from the IRS, the other from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Donnelly sat at the head of the table, opened a black folder, and spoke calmly, like this was just another Tuesday. "Mr. Malone," he said, "we're prepared to make you an offer." He didn't waste time. They had reviewed the documents I leaked. The flash drive, the website, the press coverage. They had interviewed former employees of the so-called charity, tracked property records, followed bank trails. And they had a list of names, people who had helped build the machine. Lawyers, consultants, compliance officers who had looked the other way or actively helped mask the transfers. Some of them were still practicing. One had recently been appointed to a board position at a Fortune 500 company. "We believe you can confirm their involvement," Donnelly said, "and help us prove knowledge and intent." Then he told me what they were offering. In exchange for full cooperation, I would be granted federal witness immunity. They would drop any review of my name from the offshore case files. The fraud claim that had locked up my bank account would be formally closed. My personal financial records would not be subject to audit. I would walk away without charges. But there was a catch. If I signed the deal, I would be barred from working in the financial sector again. No banking, no trading, no corporate analysis, not in a formal or advisory capacity. I would be flagged in every background check that mattered, listed as a government witness in an economic crimes case. It wouldn't be a criminal mark, but it would be a red one. The kind that ends careers in the industry I spent my life building toward. Donnelly slid the papers across the table. "You'd receive a portion of your father's estate," he said. "We've frozen properties that were never lawfully transferred. If you help us, we can make sure some of that comes back to you." I looked down at the folder. They were offering to wipe away years of debt, to give me what my family had stolen. But the price was everything I had built on my own. I didn't answer. I just stared at the offer, feeling the full weight of what it meant. A way out, but not without cost. I signed the papers. My hand didn't shake, but my chest felt hollow as I wrote my name on the government's immunity agreement. It was the end of something I had built my entire life around. The career, the reputation, the upward path I carved out one spreadsheet and sleepless night at a time. I walked out of that federal building with no criminal record, no frozen accounts, and a quiet warning in the back of my head that I'd never again be welcome in any boardroom where real money changed hands. I was clean, but marked. The months that followed were strange. The media storm around the case kept growing. My mother's trial was brutal and public, and she ended up with a conviction and a 7-year sentence. Chad was never found. Though rumors floated through forums and family whispers that he had been spotted in Belize, then Thailand, then gone again. I kept my head down. The government cleared a portion of the estate, including the small lake house my father had purchased years ago under a trust. It wasn't glamorous, but it was legally mine, and it sold quickly enough to buy something else. I didn't go back to Chicago. I bought a place up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, old, quiet, two-story cabin that needed more work than I expected, but I welcomed the distraction. I kept to myself. Learned how to fix a roof without YouTube. Started writing at night. At first, it was just to remember. Then it turned into something bigger. I wrote a book. Called it Blood in the Ledger. A family's collapse under the weight of inheritance. I didn't pitch it right away. Just wrote it straight through over the course of 2 winters, sitting by the fire with a mug of black coffee, recounting every betrayal, every lie, every quiet moment where I should have walked away and didn't. The book found its way to the right hands. An agent reached out, then a publisher, then Netflix. 3 years after I signed the immunity deal, I sat in a small cafe in Asheville watching the trailer for a series based on my life. It was surreal. They changed the names, changed the setting, but not the heart of it. The pain was real. The numbers were real. The weight of being the one who stayed silent for too long, and then spoke up too late, was real. People reached out from all over the country. Messages from strangers who saw themselves in parts of the story. It didn't make anything better, but it made it real. One afternoon, early spring, I stepped out to the mailbox at the end of the gravel driveway. Inside was a single envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in a rushed hand I hadn't seen in years. I stood there a long time before I opened it. It was from Chad. So that's my story. The full thing. I gave up the life I built to stop what should have never started, and somehow, in the process, found something closer to peace than I ever had growing up. But I'll never say it felt like justice. It just felt like the only way forward.